Okay, my name is Antonio Donini, and here is Tina Günther. And our task is to bring this very exciting conference to an end. And the initial plan was that yesterday morning there was going to be an interactive session where you would have been asked what your key issues, what the main things was on your mind, and then we would come back to these issues today. For various reasons that didn't happen, but this is your opportunity to give us feedback on the conference, to tell us what you liked, what you didn't like, what we could have done differently, what maybe what you would like to see discussed next year. For me, I keep on saying to Ulrike that she should not invite me every year, but now this year you did not invite me. but what's interesting in this gathering is that it's quite unique. Apparently, you had 850 people registering, which is the highest number ever, so congratulations to the organizers for that. And what is even more interesting is that there's a lot of energy in this room, and that maybe one of the issues we can discuss in the Q&A is how this energy could be mobilized further in the coming years. But what's clear is that you're an example for other countries where a forum like this doesn't exist. The NGO community, the humanitarian community in Germany is relatively small compared to the UK or the US, but these big countries, these big players, don't have a comparable forum. So there's something to learn here. I'm going to give the floor first to Tina to give her feedback on what struck her, what are the issues that she thought were crucial in what was discussed in these 2 days. And then I'll give you my own very personal take on these issues. So Tina, over to you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much. I'm very delighted to have the opportunity to be here and speak on Antonio's side. As he said, I'm going to try and challenge a few things that struck me over the course of the 2 days of the conference, and this year is my 4th year of attending. So I'm just going to reflect a little bit, and I'm trying to keep it very short. So first, the role of participation. In the opening of this conference, it was addressed that a lot of people and a lot of faces from all over the world have been in this room, but I don't think that's very true, to be honest. I think what we see is that this conference has always been a very, very white and very European conference. So despite the sessions on anthropology and local partnerships, I still feel like we don't hear the voices that we want to hear and that we should hear in order to make a difference. And I think we should have more opportunities and maybe we have all this beautiful technology, so why not make use of it and hear those voices in a very participatory and meaningful way. The second thing that struck me was the role of the governments. It doesn't sit well on me that we invite the governments which cooperate with the Libyan Coast Guards that shooted people and NGOs in the Mediterranean, and still we are satisfied with answers like, yeah, we need to address humanitarian issues. Like, it's just empty statements, and it really, really makes me angry. And then also, if we reflect upon what this means to share the same space with people that keep on continuing violating international law, I think we should really consider what this makes us feel like and what this means for our beneficiaries. The third thing was on accountability. I heard a lot of panelists saying, actors should be held accountable and we should hold X, Y, and Z accountable. But then I heard no one saying, I am accountable. I can be held accountable for my actions. I heard this from no one. So I really demand more honesty and openness, whereas I know that this conference has always been very critical, which I really appreciate, but I think we should go beyond that, and we should claim that we are the system and that we are shaping the system, so we are accountable for what we are doing, and we are accountable for how this system looks like. The fourth thing is on citizens and humanitarians, which has been addressed in the criminalization of aid session. So Caroline Abusada addressed why we're actually making a difference. And so if we've got citizens, and we always speak of the we as humanitarians, then I'm wondering that a citizen cannot be humanitarian, and vice versa, we humanitarians are not citizens. So I think it has been very obvious that we need to come back to the core of what it means to be humanitarian, and not a humanitarian, but just have this expression of solidarity and humanity, and also reflect this intimate connection between you and me, and like just among us, because this is a way of interacting, and it's a way of being humane, and we should not lose this regardless of labeling us as humanitarians or citizens. So to conclude, I don't think we addressed a lot of the overall topics, the overall topic we were actually supposed to discuss. Despite in a few panels, I missed the cultivation of the kindness of the human spirit, and I think we didn't talk a lot about reshaping humanitarianism and what this actually means on the ground and in the field. So, well, and then anyway, again, coming back to the point of participation, who are we to decide this? Who are we to define how we want to reshape a system? So I think in the light of the growing lack of political willingness, which I've seen a lot over the last 2 days, and the rising nationalism and trade and financial policies that have been put over health policies and over policies that are supposed to protect people and citizens, I think it will be very, very interesting to look at how the 20th Humanitarian Congress next year would look like. And I think that we should continue to take this Congress and to have this beautiful opportunity to have 850 people in a room to take this opportunity and really discuss honestly and discuss critically and reflect upon what we are doing and what our actions are in this system in order to challenge the status quo. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. This is her 4th Congress. It's probably my 8th or 9th. My gray hair and my mustache tell you that I'm from another generation. But what's interesting for me is looking at some of the constants in humanitarian action. And I think that for me, the high point of this Congress was last night, what Alberto Cairo said to us. And there was more than one hardened humanitarian warrior with a tear in his or her eye when he was speaking. And what this tells me, and I think tells us, is about the importance of empathy, the importance of dignity, the importance of proximity, and the importance of learning by doing. He was very graphic in explaining that he was a blind implementer, and bit by bit his eyes opened. So I think that that's crucial in the humanitarian relationship, how we deal with the people we have in front of us. And it's something that's so precious and that sometimes we forget because technology, because politics, because criminalization, because security and remote management make us often more distant from the people that we we are there to help, and from which we have a lot to learn as well. So that was the high point for me. I think Alberto has gone, but we need more Albertos. That was one. Now, did we reshape humanitarianism? Did we agree or not that it was out of order? Probably not. And I think what came across also, including in the last panel, is that there is not one humanitarianism, there are many. And perhaps one thing that is happening in the world around us is that, for some of the reasons that Tina mentioned, there is more diversity in what humanitarianism looks like. And that may probably be a good thing, but maybe you have some views on that as well. So what did I hear? And I'm going to be very selective here because I'm going to choose the issues that I'm interested in. But I'm happy if you contradict me. And I'll try also to sort of mention or give credit to some of the other things that I heard. I started off by talking about the crisis of multilateralism and how the decline of the rule-based international system is likely to affect the future of humanitarian action. And there, the future looks pretty grim. There is more multilateralism is no longer valued in the same way that it was, whether it's Trump or Brexit or the way in which minilateral coalitions are appearing on certain issues. I think that there are questions and risks for the future of independent, I'm not going to say neutral, but certainly impartial humanitarian action. What we're seeing is a rise of sovereignty-based discourses, and given that Germany is the cradle of Westphalian state approaches, I think what we're seeing is that the Westphalian approach is being challenged by an Eastphalian approach, where countries no longer, some countries, particularly in the East, but not only, don't value the same values that we have grown up with in Europe. So that makes also raises questions of how are the Eastphalians going to develop their soft power and their own approaches to humanitarianism. That was one aspect. The other thing that came up and was discussed quite a bit was the rise of non-state actors, and there's NSAs and NSAAs. The NSAs include, everybody from the private sector to the military to non-state actors in the economy. But NSAAs is the non-state armed actors. And the non-state armed actors are perhaps defining the way in which we work and the way in which we position ourselves in where we work in new ways that we've heard about quite a lot. And that there are trends that are worrying there, and we seem to have lost, to some extent, our ability to engage in negotiations with non-state armed actors in the way that we used to do, I don't know, in Sudan or in Afghanistan during the 80s and 90s, when issues were, in a sense, clearer. But also, I think the people that we were dealing with were not criminalized in the same way as they are today. There was a lot of discussion, my words, around the decolonization issue. We in Europe think about the Enlightenment, about the religious traditions of in Europe, as that is where we come from to a large extent. But it's clear that there are people out there who have come from different perspectives, and I'm not saying which perspective is better, but I think what is clear, and maybe the issue of power wasn't discussed as much as it might have been, it is clear that the power is still with those agencies that inherited their way of working from the colonial experience, from the development of the capitalist system, from, and the tensions, the antibodies of the capitalist system as well. So is it time to let go? Has the time come for us to reshape humanitarianism in a way that moves away from these colonial roots? That's a good question. I think that may happen whether we like it or not. We live in, I read an article the other day about a multiplex world. It's no longer a unipolar world or a multipolar world. It's a world where states position themselves, and non-state actors also position themselves on issues in different ways, creating coalitions on particular issues. So in a multiplex world, maintaining a unified, to some extent, humanitarian enterprise is likely to be more difficult. At the same time, as we heard in the previous debate on humanitarian action and development, it seems to me that the oligopoly, the coalition of states, donor states, UN agencies, and NGOs that basically provide the network power in how the system runs, this oligopoly is alive and well. And I'm not sure that the oligopoly deep down is ready to let go. And this leads me to the next point, which is about outrage. I mentioned, I invited the young people in the room to be more indignant, and the older people too. It should not be an ageist thing. But spontaneously in other panels, this issue came up of, what we do as humanitarians. We are bound by principles and ways of operating. But what we do as citizens is entirely different. And I don't think that we square this issue of what I do as a humanitarian and what I do as a citizen. And it's easier when we're dealing with issues over there. It becomes more complicated when we're dealing with issues on our doorstep, whether it's 2015 when you had hundreds of thousands of migrants, asylum seekers entering Western Europe, or now with the crisis in the Mediterranean. And somebody said that the lack of outcry is shocking. Somebody else said, or quoting someone, is that if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. And I think we have to pay attention and try to understand why there is no social movement to express this indignation. I mean, we as humanitarians deal with the consequences, but I think that when we look at the policies of Europe, of Western governments in general, and we look at the externalization of borders across the Mediterranean to the collapse of the asylum system, et cetera, I think there is cause for concern. And, lights. The Enlightenment has left us. Oh, no, it's back. So there was quite a lot of discussion on the implications of the criminalization of the délit de solidarité, the crime of solidarity. And there are no hard and fast solutions there, but I think maybe something that needs to be reshaped is the categories that we used. It's becoming clearer and clearer that the distinction between migrants, refugees, survival migrants, asylum seekers, these categories make sense perhaps for the agencies with specific mandates, but they make no sense for the people who are crossing the desert. And maybe they are migrants when they step into the desert, but when they end up in a detention center in Libya, then they're persons of humanitarian concern. So, and if they die crossing the Mediterranean, well, then they're forgotten. But there is an issue there. And the distinction between pushbacks and what someone called pullbacks. Now you have the Libyan Red Cross pulling back people who are trying to, not Red Cross, the Coast Guard. Well, maybe the Libyan Red Cross are the same as the Coast Guard. So I think that there's an issue there that I think we need to watch, and I'm not sure that we have the wherewithal to address it. Now, last or just before last, penultimate point is, it struck me, and some people have probably heard me say this before, that we humanitarians live in the eternal present. We are very close to the problems that we are dealing with, and I was struck and maybe a bit shocked by what John Ging said yesterday about that we should not over-intellectualize issues. Implying maybe that we should just get on with the job. But for me, being reflective is the way to be effective. I don't think that you can be effective if you're not reflective. So I think, and of course I may kind of want to be academic, so you would expect me to say something like that. Final point. And I said at the beginning, it's about the energy here, and how can this energy be mobilized or leveraged to affect change? And and is it the role? What is the role of this Congress? I don't know. Is it you just come here because it's a nice way to spend a weekend? I mean, are you getting out of it what you expected? Is there something that, thinking ahead for the 20th anniversary Congress next year, is there something that should be done differently to make it more meaningful? I think it's pretty good as it is, and I want to thank and pay tribute to the organizers for the great job that they have done. But, let's hear also from you about how you would like to see things evolve. So now it's over to you. Comments, what was useful, what you would have wanted to see differently, and contradict everything I said. And we have about 40 minutes for this. So. Really, I'm stunned. Was there someone? Oh, yeah. And if you could please introduce yourself and say which of these stakeholder categories you're a part of. Are you a government official, a student, a humanitarian, and how many years of humanitarian work do you have?
Hello, my name is Rolf Wienekogel. I work for a small German NGO. I'm normally based in Iraq. I'm here a bit by coincidence. I've been at this conference 3 years ago, and what struck me this time that a lot of the topics are very similar to what were discussed last time. So the securitization of aid is a big topic. Everybody's still complaining pretty much about everything that was talked about 3 years ago. The only difference was like the Central African Republic was nearly absent from a lot of discussions, and now everybody's talking about the most recent events in other places. So the other thing which struck me was with regards to the panels, I missed really lively discussions, to be honest. I would love to have more of a critical engagement and actually people presenting not so much what their organization are doing, but rather presenting very different viewpoints. And I think that would be something I hope would be more prominent in the future, because I think the critical ideas which were there in an infant stage have not been really explored. And that would be something I would expect for next year. Thank you.
Okay, but you didn't have a panel on snake bites 3 years ago. More comments? Suggestions? Yes?
Martin Bortz from the Institute of Family Medicine in Dresden. I would like to second on Tina's first comments and on my on your comment as well, because I have the same impression. This conference is organized by MSF, MDM, and Red Cross, and the panel, they mainly have an overrepresentation of those speakers. I think it would be quite interesting if such organizations just would lean back and in the audience and let other people speak. Like we talk about localization, and I haven't seen any local organization here on the panel. We had this in discussions before. If we talk about development, why not inviting development organizations, maybe more representation of political leaders, like the political decision makers. I think that would be fruitful and would refresh discussions. And if we want to talk about reshaping humanitarianism and innovative ideas, I think that that would be the way forward.
Okay. Over there.
So I want to provoke you, Mr. Donini, as we have been invited to provoke people in the very beginning. Michael Sassin from the University of Hamburg. I enter into the category of student, of educational worker in the refugee sector inside Germany and also in the semi-institutional sector in West Africa. So the thing is about decolonization. It is a very nice issue and it is a very nice problem. And it is a point where many people become very reflective. But the issue is that if you say that the institutions in the humanitarian sector, the UN institutions and so on, were inheritance of something that comes from enlightenment and capitalism and so on, you're making such a sweeping point, which is historically not very precise, that action becomes impossible based on this. You do not know what is this generic enlightenment talk that we have. What is it? What is good about it? What is bad about it? Where is it situated in history or today? So it's quite difficult to work with categories that are so sweeping, and we should probably more focus onto process, historical processes that we have nowadays, concrete situations, because there has been very much generic talk like throughout the whole Congress, talking in general when we have very different situations, and not just bashing the Enlightenment or the West in a generic and historically inaccurate way, making sweeping points that do not encourage action.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else on the issue of decolonization? Oh, no, I thought you were going to speak. Okay, I mean, for me, the issue of decolonization is a function of the social development of what we call humanitarian action didn't appear by accident. It came at a certain point in time, and it came, if you look at the roots of what we do in sort of the 18th, 19th century, the anti-slavery society. There's also traditions in Christianity and faith-based organizations. But I think for me, it's important to understand that the way in which we in the West look at the world is very much defined by what happened when we left Europe and went to colonize other parts of the world. And our way of looking at the other, at the foreigner, is still, to some extent, influenced by this way in which the sort of colonialism and the capitalist system developed. You can question this, but I'm not the only one who is saying it. And I think if you look at how power flows inside the humanitarian system, you have to accept that this power still flows very much from a group of Western donors. They're allies in the international system, and NGOs that are part of this system to a larger or greater or lesser extent. I mean, MSF will say, well, we don't get any money from states, but yes, but still, you know, historically, you come from a tradition that has its roots in these social movements. Now, of course, one of the consequences of colonization was that local cultures and local ways of dealing with suffering, in particular, were obliterated. It's clear for Latin America. It's less clear for Asia. You know, in China, the Chinese would argue, well, we were humanitarians long before you were, because we had tradition going back millennia. But the dominant humanitarian discourse is a discourse, for me, that has its roots in what has happened between sort of North Atlantic humanitarianism. It's on both sides of the Atlantic. But, you know, I don't think this is the topic of this conference. We could have an academic conference on this. And, you know, if you disagree, I'm happy to be contradicted.
Maybe if I can just add a point to that.
Are you going to contradict me?
Well, no. I would never dare to do that. But I just want to add that I think you do making a point, because as we see, all of us here are basically based in London, Geneva, Paris, or Berlin, or wherever. But where are all these people who don't have the opportunity to get visas to enter our countries? And then why again are we not going there? Because what we're seeing now, what we're doing is basically humanitarian aid functions from the north to the south. And of course, there's what we call localization, but I feel like that we're giving them voice, and it's still the distinction between us and them. And we see this when we're talking about non-state actors as well, because why are we not phrasing it the other way around? Why are non-state actors not talking to states? I think there is a clear case for your decolonization.
You have more? Go ahead.
No, I just wanted.
Like it.
I just wanted to ask you what your wishes, ideas, or what would you like to hear on the next Congress? Just throw it in. Yeah. Of that.
Yeah, I'm really curious about the general trend in public discourse. Especially, I think there's a certain narcissism that has sort of crept into our discourse and in our culture as well, because of social media and I mean, I'm a technologist, and there was a point like about 5 years ago when I was actually quite idealistic about the use of technology, but I've noticed it's had like a very polarizing effect on our society, and I would like to see how that links up with I might be completely wrong, but how it links up with the humanitarian concerns. But yeah, that's just.
Yeah, I think technology is an excellent subject to be discussed at this conference of this type. I think what we've seen over the past 20 years in the humanitarian system, such as it is a massive growth of professionalization, institutionalization, and proceduralization. And, you know, for better or for worse, it used to be when I started in this business that you know, we didn't really need any kind of special skills to join an NGO or even the UN. ICRC were more regarding on this issue. And you would kind of learn by doing. And the advantage there was that you also learned, I think, better than you do today when many people have shorter careers in humanitarian agencies. And therefore the issues of proximity and dialogue and empathy sometimes get taken over by the pressure to produce results, do log frames, report back to headquarters. And I think one important development is that the agency of the individual aid worker has shrunk. It used to be that a young aid worker in a remote, I don't know, an office in, say, in Herat in Afghanistan, would, to a large extent, have to use his or her smarts to deal with the unplanned. And, you know, monitoring and oversight from headquarters or from the country office would take weeks sometimes, because you didn't have sat phones, you didn't have WhatsApp, you didn't have, you had crackling radios that sometimes worked, and therefore your individual agency was stronger, for better or for worse. The consequences of your mistakes also could have been stronger. Now things have been sort of normalized through technology, through proper recruitment and personnel management procedures. Securitization has been a major aspect of how the agency of the individual staff has been curtailed. So we're in a new kind of era where you know, through things like cash or remote monitoring using mobile phones, drones to deliver stuff, we may be becoming even more remote. And that's, I don't know how you challenge that trend, but clearly it's a trend that's there. Florian over there.
Thank you very much. I'm Senka. I'm a doctor from MSF, and I'm attending this conference for the first time. So I'm not gonna be overly critical over it, because I have nothing to compare it with. But I would like to throw out a suggestion on what we could see more of in the following years. Maybe we could introduce a section on innovation, because a lot of the conditions in the field that we work in, they do force us to think in terms of innovation and be more creative. And technology, obviously, going back to what a colleague said in the back, does tie to this very much. I mean, there's apps nowadays that are saving lives all over the world. MSF has recently come up with a mobile surgical tent that will be used in Iraq soon. So I think innovation in this field is quite important, and the scientific research that goes behind it is also quite important. And I think having maybe workshops where we can do some practical things or see practical things, see the science put into a practical application would be a good thing. I'm not saying to cut down on theory and these philosophical discussions, because that's obviously very important too, but to also focus on the innovation and the practical side of things. Thank you.
Yep. Florian?
Yeah. Hi. It's a bit unfair for me to take the stage here, as I will probably have more opportunities than most other people to propose subjects for the next Humanitarian Conference, which is the 20th, by the way. So I hope you'll all be back next year. I think what I would like to hear more of is building on the discussion we had this morning in this room, which is around the criminalization, not of humanitarian aid, but of solidarity. And I think being very, very aware of a number of remarks of people saying this is not just about humanitarian aid, this is about something much broader, which is being criminalized here. It is not limited to aid organizations. The instinct of finding it right and being involved in supporting people who need help is not limited to humanitarians, and at the same time, if that instinct of solidarity is under attack and being criminalized, it's also not just humanitarians who are threatened by that. And I think we sort of really need to take up that challenge and see how we can bring in our voice and join our voice into a broader debate in society. And that probably means really also continuing to try to get other people here to speak. And it's been rightly pointed out that, obviously, and I think it's obvious to an extent, let's be honest, that the fact that this conference is in Berlin, in Western Europe, is going to have an impact on who's going to be here and who's going to be speaking most of the time. But we need to challenge that. We need to try and to improve that, bringing in more people from the countries we spend a lot of time talking about, but also bringing in more people from Europe, from outside the established humanitarian system. Because I think we actually heard this morning, we heard about them, but we didn't yet necessarily hear from them. So I think there's still some work to be done. And just one final comment, if I may. Yes, we need to make those changes, and yes, we need to broaden out and become more genuinely, perhaps, representative in this Congress too of the world we're talking about. But at the same time, we shouldn't be beating ourselves about the head and being sort of in any way ashamed or embarrassed about being sort of people from Western Europe or the global North who do feel a very strong sense of solidarity and who do want to sort of remain involved and who do want to help and don't do this as some sort of part of neo-colonialist project. So let's be self-critical, but let's also not sort of put too much ash on our heads.
I would even go beyond that, Florian. I would even say it's not only a criminalization of aid and a criminalization of solidarity, but I think it's this criminalization of humanity. And that's like all of us. And then maybe on your point, sorry, just one more sentence. And then maybe on your point, and I don't think that more politicians on the panel will necessarily help, because I think they're really binded to diplomacy, which is their business. But I think diplomacy will not help to stop the criminalization of humanity. Can we go to Tamam first, because he was after Florian? Like up there. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to go back to what Antonio was saying about the reflection and the comment that came on the narcissism. I think between us being told to get on with it and not think about it too much, and the fact that our discipline is being compartmentalized and organized and guidelined and into exhaustion, it feels that there is a bit of a nostalgic view to an older days where there was no control and you just went and did what you did, and you heard from your boss in Geneva, wherever that is, once every 6 months. It is a romantic view, and it goes back to this, cargo pants and Land Cruisers and stuff, but it's not viable now. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that in our case, we do medicine. And I don't want someone I care about to be cared for medically by someone who barely graduated, has no support, and very little experience. The professionalization of humanitarian aid is necessary. The fact that we used to not be able to communicate with our headquarters was a result of the situation. I think it's important for us to keep the proximity. It's important to us to keep the sense of solidarity that sends us to places we go to. It's important to include people from all backgrounds, but to acknowledge that we are beyond when it's acceptable for us to just wing it as it happens. And I think there is a great current in the humanitarian world that is arguing about professionalization that shouldn't necessarily mean that we'd end up losing our soul. From Tufts University, there's a paper published by Leslie Shanks arguing for that, and I think it's important for us to frame it that way, in a way that where solidarity becomes accepting for people we serve what we only would accept for ourselves, the same quality and the same sentiment behind it. So I think that is a topic that we always have to go beyond into. Where's the appropriate balance between us being professionalized and us being engaged and activist and politically aware as well? Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much for another great Congress. I had the pleasure to attend this for the second time now after last year. My name is Daniela. I'm from the German Medical Students Association, and I just wanted to say that I thought it was actually pretty cool that we had a panel on snake bites. I thought that was very refreshing because, like the comment earlier, there are some topics that will like reoccur every time, like politics and lack of funding and stuff like that. So I thought that the more specific panels like the panel about safe abortion care or the anthropological perspective, like not like seeing humanitarian work not only from a medical perspective but also from other perspectives, also like from the developmental side maybe next time, was pretty cool. And I heard a lot of stories about the search and rescue missions at sea. So I thought that was very interesting as someone who has no experience on the field, to kind of have like maybe a panel on how do like search and rescue missions at sea, how do they operate and stuff like that. So that's something that I would be really interested to seeing maybe next year. So thank you.
Hello, my name is Maike Voss. I'm a researcher at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, and this is my first time here as well. And first of all, thank you for this session, because this is not very common to have a reflective session on the organization of the conference. So first of all, thank you for this. What I experienced here is that most of the discussion end at the point, okay, now this is political will. And then there's a stop. And I think we need to discuss how to inform policy better with evidence. I'm a researcher, I have to say that. We need more evidence and better evidence to inform policy, and we need like to have a talk about how to, you talked about empathy, and I think we need to empathy on the political level. How do they think? How do we inform them? And this is something I think we have to discuss as well.
By the way, you are all going to get an email with a questionnaire so that you will be able to provide even more feedback on what worked and what did not work in the Congress. More? Yes?
I would like to thank you. It was my first time here in the Congress. I think it was quite interesting. I would like just to make two remarks. One is that I heard a lot about how to, I feel a little bit like my colleague. I mean, a lot of philosophical discussions that I think it's very interesting, but I think it's also a great opportunity to have people here from the headquarters, from governments, from other different organizations. And when you are in the field, you see that sometimes this communication and this partnership is not so smoothly like it is here. So I think with all this lack of support from governments, from organizations or groups that don't want to talk to humanitarian organizations, Boko Haram, Islamic State, etc. And I think that's the moment where the NGOs should be the more united as possible in the field. And when we go there, things are different. You know, we don't have the same relationship between the NGOs. We don't have a clear division of roles in the field. And in here would be a great opportunity because we have so many big bosses, you know, from everywhere that could actually, you know, help us down there to make things easier. I mean, technology is there, as he said, and we are trying to reshape humanitarianism at some point, and we have to, I think it would be great to have this opportunity to have this discussion on a practical standpoint. Since we have all these and these concerns, how us, the humanitarians or whatever, how we can help each other there, and how we can make our life easier there with the budget that we have, with the support that we have, with, you know, not only looking at the other people, what the government can do, what the community can do, what you and you and you can do, but what we can do there to optimize our resources that we have in the field. And one suggestion for next year is we discussed a lot about this criminalization of aid workers and the lack of engagement from the civil society that we mentioned in a few discussions. And I think there's a very important role of the media and the communications departments of each one of our organizations. So we have the media fundraising, we have the media speak out, témoignage, or we have different kind of media releases in the world about us, about our job, about the conflict. And I think this is a main point on this discussion of criminalization and how our work is seen by the world today. It was not the same way we were seen, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. I was not there, but that's my impression. Thank you.
Okay, good point. We had a panel on the media, but I couldn't be everywhere, so did you go?
No.
Ben Parker, is he here? Ben?
No, Ben Parker has left, I think.
He's hiding. Okay, we're nearly there. Any more final thoughts?
There's one over there and one there.
Oh, okay.
Last chance.
Yes, here. No.
There's two there.
Oh,
now.
all right.
Da und, yeah.
So there's two there and one there. Where was it?
Marisa.
Okay.
Hi, Lars Wiltberger from the Leiden University studying international relations. For next year, I just felt that at the beginning of the conference, self-reflection and criticism of oneself was addressed. And I don't know, the conference seemed to be lacking some genuine and brutal self-criticism. Maybe next year?
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes?
And just below that, yeah. Did you have a question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Hi, my name is David. I'm studying epidemiology. I would like to ask a question on your evidence comment. Like, providing high-quality data consumes resources you might use to do other things in the field. Do you really think better data and better evidence will help to make your point in this time of like fake news and people driven by public opinion, which is not that data-based? And what I wondered is that we did not have a session on nuclear weapons and nuclear war in like the current politic landscape. Maybe this could be an idea for next year. Thank you.
You mean the humanitarian impact of nuclear war, or how humanitarians can counter the proliferation? Do you want to answer the question on...
I think it's a huge discussion, and we should go for a beer.
I mean, if there was a panel on famine, I wasn't there, but I don't know if they discussed the issue of how data was used and misused in the Somalia famine. I'm a colleague of mine at Tufts has written a book on this, and you know, the data was there, the information was there. It was the politics that didn't follow. There was a last comment. Yes?
Okay, so I'm Marisa. I'm not working in the humanitarian aid sector at all.
But now you're interested in joining it, right?
I always have been since I have organized this Congress 6 years ago. Was it 6 years ago, I think? But I must say I really had some very good sessions here, some that were not as convincing, but some really good ones, and especially the last one I heard on the local partners in emergency and in emergencies and the cluster system really impressed me from the structure, how it was done. Like, I really liked the question and answer structure of it, how the moderator posed a question and then everybody could give an answer on the panel first, so you got a really good impression of what is talked about. And then also in the end, we had a full half an hour of discussion time, and it was a really interesting discussion from my point of view. I thought the panel was really well staffed, if you want to put it like that. They were really interesting and very relevant partners on this panel. So I wanted to end it on this very positive note, because I thought that was a very critical and very interesting and very...
Are there any other comments? Yes? Last one.
Oh, sorry. That was not my intention. I only want to make one comment about this debate in the morning about the criminalization of aid. And this was for me the most impressive debate, because there was this thing about that the humanitarian community on its alone cannot resolve the problems. It has to make outreach to the civil society, to other actors, to look for alliances, because what is threatening the humanitarian community, there are a lot of other things, there's threats also outside, which are similar. And we have to look for allies. We cannot enclose ourselves as a community and say we are only special because we are with the humanitarian principles. We have to look for outside people who are also similar thinking like us, and we look for that. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I agree that there's a risk that humanitarians will develop a kind of ivory tower mentality that we do this and that's our speciality. But we're also part of society. And as I said before, I think in Europe, when we are confronted with the collapse of the asylum regime, as citizens, we need to react. As humanitarians, I mean, you have to be careful how you mix the two, but definitely I've been arguing for more indignation and more social movements to address these kinds of issues. Tina, you have any?
No, I think Zidune said it a lot of times. He just said, take action. And we can all do it. Like, we don't need to be affiliated to any kind of the established organizations, I think.
Okay, if there are no other pressing comments, I'd like to thank the organizers and the historical organizer Ulrike and the NGOs that are supporting this Congress, and all the young people who are outside, and the catering and the general
You're
very
stealing
positive
my lines,
atmosphere. Oh, sorry. So I withdraw everything. I withdraw everything.
But the thought is good. Sorry. First of all, can I then thank Antonio and Tina? First of all, maybe a round of applause. Because I'm sorry. This is my job, and I really like doing it. Okay. So, and then the next thing is I would like to thank all of you for coming along and for making this Congress such a lively event. Yes, we take on board the comments that have been made about self-criticism. That is important, but your criticism is important too, as is your support. And the fact that you're here shows that. So much appreciated also on behalf of all the other organizers for being here. And please come. Next time is the 20th. So next, big thank you to our speakers and panelists. We've just had the last two here. I can never remember how many of them there are, but it is absolutely fantastic and amazing to see so much different expertise, opinion, motivation, and action, indeed, on these panels. The next thing, a big thank you to the steering committee that really guides the organization of this event. To the technical support, and I want to mention especially Lucas from our MSF IT team, but there have also been others. To Robert, who's been managing the live stream. To the technical support and the support staff from the Charité, our hosts here. Thank you very much. To Mandy, that's bad handwriting, Mandy Liebschwager and team of the Café Seidenfaden, who've been doing our catering. To, whether you can believe it or not, 100 volunteers who've been helping us out with all kinds of things and without whom this thing would not be happening or possible. Thanks very much. And last, but by no means least, to two colleagues whom I would have loved to have had on the stage here with me, but they are up there, and it's Ute Zurborg and Nora Detmer. Thank you very much.